Yes, dear Jaap Blonk, thank you very much for making this interview possible on the Sunday afternoon after this very intense workshop we just
You're
had.
welcome.
Yeah. How much does Schwitters still influence your work and life today?
Yeah, it's not such an easy question. The influence started a long time ago, about 40 years ago for me, when mainly memorizing and performing the Ursonate. But I'm still performing some of his poems and other sound poems, and also in my graphic work, my visual work. I think there's some influence of his collages and things, and also indeed the idea of using anything from everywhere, which he did in his visual work, and I have also the use in my sound work, in my voice work, of all kinds of everyday sounds, vocal sounds, but also from other sources, to freely use that. I think it has something to do with the influence of Schwitters and or also of Dadaism in general.
So you don't need to, maybe, if it would be possible, to meet him. I mean, he's dead for a long time, but if you could, would you like to meet him in person?
Oh, that would have been wonderful. Yeah, he must have been a very. There are so many wonderful anecdotes about him, and it would be quite a thrill to meet him. Yeah, sure. Yeah. I once, in the early days when I started performing Ursonate, I did it in Utrecht in the early 1980s, and there was a man who talked to me who was 93 years old, who had heard Schwitters in 1923 on the tour he did with Van Doesburg and others, and they performed in Utrecht. And he said about my version of Ursonate, he said, well, yours is a storm compared to the spring breeze that Kurt Schwitters was. So he must have also been a very gentle person.
You recorded the Ursonate, Kurt Schwitters' Ursonate, twice. The first time in 1986 and the second time in 2003. And of course they are different. The first one is longer and the second one is shorter. Mm-hmm. Can you explain why you did record the Ursonate twice, and how it is possible that one recording is shorter than the other one?
Well, the first recording in 1986 was for the LP made by B.V. Haast, and which actually was then prohibited by the son of Schwitters, Ernst. So the LP had to be taken out of the shops, and in the end I got all the copies and I sold them at performances, and but then only in the early parts of the 21st century, I think 2002, there was after Ernst, the son, had died in 1996, the Sprengel Museum in Hanover made a deal with the grandson, Bernd, who wasn't so much interested in the sound poetry. It became possible to get permission again to issue recordings of it. And so I got this offer from the Basta label, and I thought it would not be a good idea to combine Ursonate with other pieces on a CD. I thought it more interesting to add to the 1986 recording, which was very precise and made reading the piece. And a bit of a dry version, but very exact, to just add a live version where I was not reading the piece, where I was doing it from memory in a very rich acoustics, like it was a small chapel. And I thought that would make an interesting comparison also because the cadenzas of the two versions would be really different.
Well, I was thinking about Glenn Gould's interpretation of the Goldberg variations, because he also recorded that twice.
Uh-huh.
And the first one was shorter and the second one was longer.
Uh-huh.
So in your version it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it has nothing to do with adding a little bit more your freedom to interpret it different?
I think it has probably speeded up a little bit in the live performance, and some sections are I perform I think faster, especially the very repetitive sections where I couldn't actually read it anymore when I'm performing. It's sort of part of the motorics of my mouth.
Yeah. Well, earlier you told this afternoon that you needed kind of 3 years before you first performed the Ursonate. Can you explain how you learned it and how Ursonate became a part of you, that you could
well,
express?
I had no intention of, I have no idea that you could do public performances of it, and so I was just a student. I had just quit my studies of mathematics, and I was sort of looking around, what am I going to do? I was interested in poetry and music, playing saxophone, interested in jazz and free jazz, and I had the photocopies on a shelf in my room, and every once in a while I would take them out and practice certain sections of it, and just for fun, and then so all like it was playing around with it, and then at some point I noticed I had memorized large sections of it, and I could easily do one more effort to memorize the whole piece, and so yeah. And actually. And then I got the offer to make the LP in 1986. Then I thought I put some extra effort in by doing articulation exercises, where in order to do the repetitive sections even a little faster. So I actually devised my own articulation exercises. It's like and so all kinds of sequences of consonants, which I had written down, and I would practice with the metronome for months, and make notes of the speed and trying to speed them up.
Okay, wow, that sounds impressive. What is your connection with the German language and maybe even the culture? Because Schwitters is born in Hanover, which is the northern German part, where people speak a really clear German. How did you get inside his way of speaking?
Well, when I went to high school, it was still required to learn 3 modern languages besides Dutch. I learned French, German and English, and then also Latin and Greek later on. So I think not so many Dutch people, especially nowadays, read a lot of German. But I always read a lot of German, and I love. There's so much good literature in the German language and philosophy and so. And especially one book was decisive for me to go into a career in the arts, which was Ernst Bloch, Das Prinzip Hoffnung, the Principle of Hope. I read that in 1980, and when I was still in doubt, what am I going to do? And this gave me the courage to go and try and be a creative artist and composer, and the way it is now. Next to the other book, the Thomas Mann, Dr. Faustus, which I read around the same time, which was also a big influence. So yeah, all those books I read in German, and I still read a lot of German. So, and then later on, when I got to more international career, I have performed in Germany a lot and spoken German. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more specific what attracts to at Ernst Bloch's work? What was it that made such an impact on you?
Well, I got the idea from it. Well, of course, it's a huge work that anything from the experience of life can be turned into art. That's the main thing. Well, of course, there's a lot of different messages in the whole book. I cannot sum it up in a few minutes, but I got that courage and see that, yeah, like I said, whatever from life, you can turn it into art.
Okay, yeah. So this became like a tag, like we say today, in your life, that you still remember that and you can transport it into your life, and it's like optimistic and gives you also the energy to continue your way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, you recorded many albums. What recording way do you prefer, the studio or the live performance?
Oh, it depends. What kind of piece? I mostly nowadays I find a studio situation more interesting. Although for some combinations of musicians, a live situation can be better. But for myself, if I work as a soloist, I can. The studio situation is better for me.
And why is that?
I think it allows for more precision while still being alive. I think, yeah. Well, of course, much of my work is also made by editing in a computer, and I have, for instance, for some work, I have I use a huge collection that I have of samples of my voice that I can use in different contexts. So then it's editing on the computer, but still, for instance, the album I recorded last year with Tomomi Adachi. We did both. We recorded. We were in Berlin at this place called L'Etage, and we had 2 days there and recorded a lot of material, about 2 hours at least. And then for the CD, and we ended it in the evening with a concert of about 45 minutes. And for the CD, I think I chose the 2 sets of the concerts, which after listening to everything seemed the best for a CD. So there I chose the live recording.
Okay. Well, you were born in 1953 in Woerden, which is in Holland, in the Netherlands. But you were born in a Calvinist family.
Yes.
How does this still maybe color you as an artist and a human in this society, or maybe not?
Yeah, well, I think it turned me into a rebel. At a fairly early age, there was this very slow singing of psalms in the church, where if I sing one line, it goes like "Teichend Herd der Jacht und Kommen." So that's just one line, and as a young boy, I had to breathe 2 or 3 times to finish one line, and the congregation was dragging like a half note after the organ, so it seemed all very ugly to me and very boring. And so when I was 8 or 9 years old, I didn't want to sing anymore, and my mother was telling me, "Jaap, you should sing," but I didn't want to. So that and I started it taught me to hate singing at all. I didn't want to sing any songs even in school or whatever, and I think this was important later on. Well, one thing in the whole spirit, that when I learned about Dadaism and about sound poetry, it was very attractive to me, as it's so very far away from my upbringing, and also the way I got into voice work when I was well, in my late 20s, that I was much more attracted to consonants than to vowels, which of course sound poetry has a lot of consonants, and it lives on that much more than singing. So I had a completely different entrance into voice work than by singing. And only much later on I got to like singing. At first I disliked any vocal music, classical music. Only much later on I learned to like it again, and I'm starting to sing again. Now I sing all songs as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the Calvinist idea is a very, very harsh, you can say, because you are not allowed to do anything that makes you happy in a way, right?
So yeah, it's just very dark and black. Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
There were most things were forbidden, and there was a lot of threats of hell and being damned, and so I was at times very, very scared as a boy that I had done something not so good, and that I would end up in hell, and so yeah. And God would send his lightning and would hit me, and so. Yeah.
But how is it possible that a system like this can live in society like we have, with such strong rules? What do you think?
Yeah, they persist, and they're sort of very much a closed community, and but I know of some family members, like cousins of me, that who got to work in a different context, and really got such problems that they ended up in mental hospitals. That for the conflict between the outside world and the world that they were brought up in, but still, you know, especially now, I just recently read about this wave of fundamentalist Protestant churches that's coming up in Latin America right now. I think already 40% of the Catholics have been converted into some very strict Protestant religion. It's incredible how that can happen. Yeah.
How was the contact with between you and your family when you started to express yourself like you did, like vocalizing?
Yeah, but my parents didn't want any part of it, and so they never came to any performances. So my brothers I have 3 younger brothers. They are more liberal, and one of my brothers told me that my father had said to him, well, it's probably art what Jaap does, but he shouldn't do it on Sundays. So, but my brothers, I can even make music with them. One of my brothers is a church musician, but in a much more open and liberal church, and he plays the organ, and I have done concerts with him as well. And one other brother plays guitar and banjo in sort of old jazz bands, and I've performed with them as well. So yeah. Yeah.
Well, just yesterday evening, by a coincidence, I met an old friend in Groningen, in the city, and I told him that I will meet you today, and he told me that he remembers very well when he was young and on an elementary school, that he enjoyed your Ursonate performance in his music lessons.
Oh.
How was your experience to perform in schools? Did you had also contacts with the parents maybe, and how was that?
Oh yeah. I did not have so much direct contact with the parents, but I remember of that time. But mostly the kids really like it, and I also worked with the kids to make some sounds and sound poetry and so. But I heard that some parents were complaining that, and those were especially the immigrants, like the Turks or Moroccan people, that our children are here to learn proper Dutch, and what is this nonsense? What does it serve for?
Yeah. But how was it for you to perform for the school kids, for the young?
Yeah, I really liked it, and they got really energized, and sometimes it was even difficult to keep the order, and they jumped on the tables and so on. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Well, in an earlier interview, you mentioned that even the audience sometimes reacted to performances you did very weird, like by throwing beer at you. When I was reading that, I thought, well, in today's understanding of audience, it looks very perfect, like in a punk audience or a heavy metal audience. At least in their behavior, to throw beer at the performing artist.
Yeah, I was told that in the punk aesthetics, throwing beer at an artist is an act of love. So.
Well, can you tell me how that went and in that situation when that happened, and how did you react?
Well, it gave me more energy. I just went on performing, and so yeah, it's just like, yeah, that's the spirit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I saw also a very interesting performance on YouTube. You had in Poland. Where you performed a solo performance where the audience was not acting at all. So they were not even laughing, or so they were just sitting there, and that was it. Can you tell me, in your experience, how the audience changed since the 80s, or maybe not?
I don't think there has been much of a change, and I just the past few days I was performing in Leeuwarden in this festival Explore the North, and in 2 afternoons they had these groups of people who were taken by a leader to 3 different places to hear or to attend 3 15-minute performances, and one of which was mine, and for all of them it was just completely new. There had many comments that because they were not prepared. It was a surprise what performance they would be offered, and so all of them said, I've never heard anything like it, and so it doesn't get any more known. Actually, to the contrary, to the opposite. Like in the 80s and 90s, I was much more known, and also the art of sound poetry, at least in Holland. Because I was on the radio regularly every month or so, at least, and but now that's all finished. It's all totally banished from the media. This kind of art, and you might heard it after midnight in some obscure cable program or so. But at this time, I'm completely unknown in this country, and actually the whole of experimental voice work or improvised music is totally obscure now, much more so than in the 1980s and 90s, because you never hear it on the radio, let alone on TV. It's impossible. I've been on TV quite a few times in the 80s and 90s, but not anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you once performed in an empty cage of the Amsterdam Zoo.
Yeah.
I read that. Do you consider yourself maybe belonging there in the cage of a zoo? How was that to perform there?
Oh, I was actually there were groups of kids who actually considered me a strange kind of animal, and they had their bread and sandwiches with them and this was throwing them at me.
That's beautiful. Yeah. In sound poems, you worked a lot with Kurt Schwitters, well, the Ursonate, but also Anna Blume. And you also worked with sounds from Hugo Ball. Like
Yeah, well, actually, I nowadays much more present my own work, but those were important for me, and I still sometimes I like to perform them. Yeah,
yeah,
and uh, but not very regularly. So, for instance, the year 2016 a little more because this was the centennial of Dada, but now it's more of an exception. And well, when I come in some places where I've never been before, and I will in a performance include some historical sound poems just to give it a context, and but mostly I perform my own work.
okay. Well, you also recorded with Damon Smith on double bass
Yes.
in a duo, what is very interesting and very powerful still. I just want to know from you what you think about Hugo Ball and Kurt Schwitters in this society. Does it still have a spot? Is it still important to...
I think it's worth to keep fighting for giving it a spot, because it's still to 99% of the people completely unknown, and they have no idea. And well, I especially like in these performances for an unprepared audience, I like to include some of those works and to tell people, you know, this is more than 100 years old, and people are really amazed, and it's important to keep fighting for that.
Good. Well, you were a saxophone player in your 20s, which is a while ago, but you never felt really attracted to really to improvise free on that instrument, like maybe Anthony Braxton or even Willem
yes,
Walker.
I was trying, and I had the famous 4-alto double LP of Anthony Braxton. I was trying to emulate that, but I couldn't do it. I always felt like it didn't quite sound, I couldn't get quite out of the horn what I wanted to, and so it was a great liberation when I found I could do it on the voice, much more direct and easy.
Yeah. Can you tell me how the switch was for you to enter just the vocalizing from saxophone? What was important for you to realize in that way?
Yeah, well, at some point the voice was sort of improving on what I was doing on the saxophone, and at least in terms of free improvising. And I also had in those days I had this band where I played, we played one song where I would start with a tenor saxophone solo, but gradually into a voice solo, and so fragments of saxophone and or some voice and saxophone together, and then only voice. So this was sort of mirroring the development. So,
well, can you tell me what for you is the most perfect or the most beautiful sound you ever experienced?
That I ever heard?
Yes.
Oh gosh, I can't answer that really. I think it's any moment that I hear a wonderful sound. That is the most wonderful sound I experience, and when it's there, you know, and yeah, what shall I say?